um, have an account on TikTok, and I am currently waiting for the account that I do have to come back to me in a way that it actually works. I'm going to probably be on here for podcasts for a little while. So I want to make sure that everything is getting taken care of in a positive way. That all being said, we're going to go ahead and start. Since this is the first as a podcast, as a kind of a series thing, I want to do this as some of the things that we've been talking about and some of the things that we're going to talk about in this podcast as we move forward. If you do not know me, my name is Widda. I am an archaeologist, an anthropologist, a healer, a historian, a storyteller, and I am a globally mixed Indigenous human being, two-spirit, you might say. And I use these platforms to try and give a base level of information to people so that people can actually know what is really out there going on in a time when a lot of information is hidden. I have a website where I compile bibliographies in widdaord.com of the stuff that I am actually talking about in the lives that I do, now in the podcast that I'm doing on Spotify. And again, I'm also doing the video vlog over on YouTube. We have 3 people there right now, actually. And that website with all the bibliographies can get you links to where to find me at, and can also get you links to base level information, articles that I would hope that you would take, and they will be the foundation of your search further. I firmly believe that education should not be gatekept behind a $40,000 a year paywall. And it shouldn't be gatekept behind language that is very hard for even people with extensive degrees to sometimes understand. I've always considered myself to be verbose with a very broad vocabulary, and frequently it is very hard for me sometimes to parse out entire paragraphs where I have to look up every other word. So because of that, I like to bring education on a base level. My focuses are paleoanthropology, decolonization, prehistory, and then Bronze and Iron Age history. I have several different things that I really focus on and dig into, and all of these things get talked about in my lives. Generally, I tend to start with that thought process, though, with how we've evolved, how we got here, how we are here, who we are, because I think that for many people, that is actually an important thought process as a subject. Many people are curious about that, and yet many people don't have an understanding of it. Either they grew up in a space in a time where the idea of looking outside the books given to you were was not an appropriate thing because quest for knowledge was not encouraged, or whether or not it's just been hard to find that information. There's also many people who have grown up prior to having easy access to a lot of this information. So with this, we're going to be starting this new podcast on Spotify. I'm going to try and cross that podcast over onto a few other podcast platforms. And as always, we'll still be doing the videos on YouTube. If you are following me on YouTube, you can use that as a place to comment and answer questions. I like questions. Questions actually for me are the way that we understand and the way that we learn. I feel that if we are seeking knowledge, then we're more likely to gobble it up. We're more likely to understand it, to want to devour it. And I feel that when we ask questions, it broadens both the person who's answering the question's understanding and your understanding. And it also gives the ability to seek new paths in every little avenue, seek out all the fine print. And so for me, questions and interaction and knowledge is a really great thing. Our quest for knowledge and interaction. And so with that, this is going to be the start of this. I'm going to try and do it at least once a week. I do not know yet if I'll be able to set a date and a time. And I am also going to try to ensure that we have singular topics and we stick to the singular topics instead of going over a broad variety of topics, especially as it will probably be kept a little bit shorter than what we've normally been doing, which is several different hours. sometimes 4, sometimes 6. So I want to make sure that I'm creating it on a very low key and positive way, taking some of the things that I've learned as I've been using TikTok to do this and kind of cross platforming it. Um, as said in the very beginning, I am an archaeologist, an anthropologist, a historian, a storyteller. I am a healer. I'm a teacher. Several other things as well. I'm a two spirit. I am a war veteran. I've stood many front lines on this side. I have several children, some who I have given birth to, and some who I have raised. Um, and I have a very beautiful, broad family that really spans across the globe. And for me, that's an extremely important thing to be involved in, as I was taught to always follow all my relations. Um, some of the other things that we speak about in here, or that we will be speaking about in here with that understanding, is a quest for finding one's ancestry without appropriating cultures from others, and how to reconnect to ancestry and how to reconnect to ancestry worship, to look at the thought process of what animism is, to understand that science is an indigenous thought process, um, and to have a broader scientific understanding of the interconnectedness of all of us. So, with that, um, I think that today I want to start on something that is kind of new to me, and something that has been relatively new throughout the last year and has really come about. But first, I realized I didn't bring a drink in with me. So give me 1 second and I'll be back with a glass of water. I apologize. There's not even music in the background, just the sound of me grabbing water. We've long had understandings of ideas of how we came to be here. We have understandings and ideas that go back millennia upon millennia, and that very few of us really understand the concept of today. And we have desires, or not desires, we have understandings of why we are here and of who we are that go back just a few millennia. We have understandings that go back 100 years. Anything that is a quest for knowledge, anything that takes something you see, something you observe in nature, something you observe around you, and has a thought process or a hypothesis of what's going on, predicts what's going on, states aloud or states in their head, or works out a thought process of how what's going, or how what they see is going to translate into an action, and then tests that hypothesis and or prediction, and the testing proves true, becomes a theory. If it proves false, you go back to the hypothesis and retest it. This is science. This is the base understanding of science. And the base understanding of science is something that has been global for an extended period of time. It has only been in the last 2,000 years at most that an idea of science has not been a global understanding. And so, with the idea of science having been a global understanding, the questioning of why, the wanting to understand, the wanting to know more, the wanting to dig deeper that we see in the very first of our species, with that quest of understanding and that quest of knowledge, we see going back millions of years, we must understand that one of the core things about us is that questioning, that wanting to understand and then wanting to dig deeper, that scientific desire of thought process. No TikTok, I'm sorry. I'm actually trying to set this up as we actually have a Spotify live stream as well. Or I guess it's not a live stream at this point, it's just a podcast. but I'm setting up a podcast on Spotify, which I will be crossing over into some other platforms so that other people can see. And I'll be continuing to do live streams like this here on YouTube. And then I'll probably upload pieces of these live streams to TikTok on the new account that I have. It is in Widda Ord. No periods or dots in this one. So if you do not have me anymore on TikTok, or if you have found Inwood Ord on TikTok, like some of my friends, and have gone, you're not following me anymore, it's that I set up the new account to look like the old account. And I am over there. It's just Inwood Ord. And the reason I'm not following you is because the old account is no longer there. So, or the reason you're not following me is because the old account is no longer there. So when we look at quest for knowledge, a scientific understanding, a desire to be scientific, we can see that this dates back to the very earliest of our species. And with that quest for knowledge, that desire for scientific understanding, that desire to know more, that desire to see over the next horizon, to create a new tool, to figure out how to wear clothes, those desires that we have within us are as foundational to our species as anything else. And they are always the quest of why, right? So when the quest of why starts becoming based on blind faith instead of based on logic and scientific fact, right? We see that the quest for why stops being because we're a part of a whole, and the quest for why becomes because I'm perfect and special. And we do see that the quest for why being because I am part of a whole is something that's as old as who we are, right? It is that animistic thought process that does not see you as separate from anything else. And since that animistic thought process doesn't see you as separate from the entirety of the world around you, from the entirety of the biome, from the house you live in, doesn't see you as separate, and because that knowledge was there for so long, we know that that knowledge is returning in a scientific theory was only gone for roughly, I would say roughly 1600 years, but I think it might be a little bit less, right? So when we're looking at that, we can see that it is as integral to who we are, this understanding of why we're here, this desire to understand why we are here as is integral to who we are as human beings, as sight and sound, as the ability to walk, right, to the upright. There is integral and is necessary to who we are as human beings. When we can look at the scientific thought process of it, we can see that by a scientific thought process, when we're looking at things like everything in the entire universe is made up of atoms, the Big Bang starts this explosion of atoms, and those atoms then create the things that come along, right? They develop into further. So if everything starts from this explosion of multitudes of atoms that then figure out ways to become more, to coalesce or to move together or to unite to become more, or figure out ways to develop in different ways, right? As those atoms move us forward and we become a planet, right? We become however you want to define the start of the earth that we live on, right? When we see that unity of atoms that creates that foundation of earth that we have, creates a body for that earth to live in and to be involved in. Just like your body is made up of many different organs, there's not a single part of your body that is single cell. Like there's not a single part of you that isn't working in unison with 100 other parts of you. And when we look at anything else that's alive, anything else on the planet, anything else that we deem reality, we see that it is a multitude of many things. It is never a singular, it is always a many. Everything even that we define as a singular is still created of a many. So when we look at a scientific understanding of being here, a multitude of atoms that are coalescing together or coming together or growing together, but uniting, right? More than one, right? When we see a coalescing of atoms through a scientific knowledge, or we see a unity of the entire biome through an animistic knowledge, we can see that opposite of that being the idea of being created by a singular, right? We can also see in the both ancient knowledge of being united as a part of a biome that is many different things working together to create many different things working together to create many different things working together to create, right? Because many things working together create the human body, but it's many human bodies together that create a society, but it is many human bodies and many other species and many other things that we would even think of as inanimate that working together create an entire environment. So when we look at that concept that is deep and old, and then we look at that concept through a new scientific lens, we can coalesce the two of them together and understand how we're coming into being maybe in a little bit better of a way, right? Because if your quest is how we are evolving, if your quest is why are we here, right? If your question is what is it that means human is human, if your question is why is human, right? We can look at these different, almost contradictory ways and see one that is ancient and one that we consider to be new, though isn't necessarily new, that is measurable and able to be looked at and tested and seen, right? And see how these work together and see how that broader understanding comes. Now, there are always going to be people that still want to believe in the blind faith that they have, and they can do their thing, right? Can't stop them. Why bother trying? They can do their thing. But because there's always going to be people who, you know, do their thing, just do their thing. We have to, though, if we truly want to understand why we're here, look at this process of so many different things coming together to create a whole as an evolutionary process. And when we look at it as the evolutionary process that we have a tendency to talk about, we can see that some of the ancient or the new science thoughts that were given, like, the Darwin's theory of evolution doesn't necessarily work exactly as Darwin's theory states it, though the idea of evolving absolutely works. We can see that we're continuing to evolve today, and we can look back through and use scientific data, use concrete things that you can hold, substantial things that you can look at to prove or to prove for now, because we must remember that facts are always changing. Knowledge is always moving. Knowledge should always be moving. Learning should always be moving. So when we're looking at this process forward, many people have this worry that we're coming from the apes, that we're coming from something that they view as not being something that they want to divide the validity of, right? Instead of seeing the entire biome as a valid space, instead of seeing that the plants and the animals all have a level of consciousness, as science is proving every day, many people don't want to see themselves as being a part of that. They want to see themselves as being separate from that. This is where you hear comments like, your species is the apes, my species is not, which I've heard several times. Or where you hear comments like, we didn't all descend from apes. And I need to ensure that people understand that you did not descend from the apes that are here on this planet today. Nobody is saying that you descended from the species that we've named gorilla. We didn't even descend from species like chimpanzee. We have what's called a last common ancestor. There's a last common ancestor of every species, be it plant or animal, on this planet. There is a last common ancestor for all of us, and it divides sometimes way back. Like they realize that we aren't descended from lizards. We don't have a lizard brain, that in fact we have a last common ancestors with lizards, and we descended down two separate paths. Right? We can see that one of the last common ancestors of every mammal on the planet we have today is a shrew-like creature that lived during the Jurassic, right? Flew through trees or hopped through trees. When we're looking at those things, we can conceptualize the idea of where we're coming from as not being that we came from the apes, but that we came from a primate species that predates us, that we descended from a species that has other descendants, yet we are not descendant from those other descendants. We're not descendant from the Neanderthals. We're a sibling species with the Neanderthals, having a last common ancestor, excuse me. So when we're looking at things like that, we can unite logic and not so we can take logic and the fear of faith that we or fear that is found in faith and show that the fear that is found in faith is sometimes not a fear that is going to pan out as being as bad as you think it is. Like it's not what you think it is. So when we're looking at that, we can see that a last common ancestor between us and the chimpanzees, or pan genus, our genus is Homo. Last common ancestors between us and the chimpanzees is 7.5 million years ago with Graciopithecus freybergi, which is around Greece, around the upper portions of the Mediterranean Sea. Now, it's important to understand at this point of time that the Mediterranean Sea is a savanna, it's not a sea. So this area in the northern part of the continent of Africa and the southern part of the continent of Europe are very much combined at this point of time. It's also important to note at this point of time that the foundation of the environment, the foundation of how we're living due to the environment, right? The environment in itself is fluctuating at this time. There is spaces across both the continent of Africa and the continent of Europe that are extremely green and lush, and then spaces that are very unlivable, either due to extreme cold in the northern areas or the southern areas near the poles, or due to extreme heat. And so because of that understanding of how the environment is fluctuating, we can see that along the Mediterranean basin, all around that basin really becomes very much a part of who we are as a species, like what develops who we are as a species. It's a space that we have been since Graciopithecus freybergi. So we can see Graciopithecus freybergi about 7.2 million years ago. We can see that there are footsteps in an island in Crete that are upright footsteps that like 7 million years ago, 6.5 to 7 million years ago. And then at the same time, we can see a find that came out about a year and a half ago, Saleo and Anthropicus Tadici, which came out as the skull showing where the foramen magma has migrated on the skull from the back to the bottom where upright walking skulls are. If you look at your dog or you look at your cat, you can see that their spine comes out from the back of their skull, not from the bottom of their skull, and that's because they walk on all fours. But when you look at us as human beings, you see that our base of our skull is where our spine comes out, our spinal opening, or foramen magna coming out from our so that our C-spine and the spinal, hold on a second, my vacuum thing went off. The foramen magma where the spinal cord comes out, right? So that migrates down, and we can see that it's Sahelanthropus tadici that was migrated out down at 7 million years ago in a lake bed in Chad is where they found that skull. So when we're looking at this, we can see that the start of us as upright, right, as fully upright is around the same time that we have that last common ancestor, a possible mixing link, as they would call it, between us and chimpanzee. And so we're seeing that this period of time of us, right, where we start is roughly 7 million years ago. We can see at this time that who we are doesn't really look like the apes. Now, we can see that there are more similarities, absolutely. You know, you might find um, the crest along the top of the skull, which is where the muscular attachments go to for the jaw, so that when you're crunching, you know, really hard nuts, or tuber or not tubers, but like fronds of plants, that you can crunch through those easier. But we also see that the start of the movement of like the shoulder girdle and the hip girdle is starting at this point too, to become more like who we will be eventually. Now that's 7 million years ago. I personally view us as having been descended from Homo erectus. Our current understanding, and this came about this last year actually, is that Homo erectus themselves is one of two species in existence who speciated from what we thought up until this last year was a mythical method of speciation. Is a theoretical, not mythical, sorry, theoretical method of speciation. We had never seen a species that had actually speciated this way. And because we had never seen a species that had actually speciated through convergence, last year we found two species that speciated through convergence, and we were a little astonished. And the two species that we found that speciated from convergence is Homo erectus, who speciated from Homo, sorry, I want to say heidelbergensis, and it's not heidelbergensis. Homo, it's handyman. Homo habilis. Thank you. Homo habilis, handyman, and Lucy's Australopithecine, and then Paranthropus boisei, who is what we recently found out is our first actual tool user, our first species to actually create stone tools. So Homo erectus speciates from Homo habilis, Paranthropus boisei, and Australopithecus. And I always get these Africanus. I might have them backwards, but I believe it's Africanus, which would be Lucy. So them speciating out of convergence, they actually seem to have had a lot of different morphology in their species. And so we see that their species is several different, what we call species in half of paleoanthropology, or what we call subspecies in the other half of paleoanthropology. But these several different species, many of them come together to create our speciation as well. And we see our speciation starting at 300,000 years ago, though new evidence is showing things just a little bit differently. Our earliest that we find of us currently, and I haven't dove into the new evidence enough to really go into it, but what we have found currently is that our oldest of us is in Morocco. So we find that around 3 million or 300,000 years ago. And then at 260,000 years ago, we find one in Ethiopia. And then at about 260,000 years ago, we find another one of us in, I believe, near Johannesburg in South Africa, but I'm not exactly sure if I remember correctly on the third one. And so this means that we as a species start in three different spaces, and our current understanding of us as a species starting in three different spaces is that we start from a convergence of Homo heidelbergensis, Homo antecessor, Homo ergaster, and a couple of the other Homo erectus descendant species, making Homo erectus kind of like our grandparent species, and these other species kind of like our parent species. Coming from several different parent species in several different spaces at once, in this coming together of speciation through convergence, is also one of those things that, because we have this new information on it, we're also seeing a couple of other things, like 300,000 years ago, a skull that is very similar to our skull, shows many of the different things that we see from the earliest skulls that we have of us, but also shows other species like erectus, just like we all also show other species in our earliest, is found in China. at 300,000 years ago. This species is so new we haven't even named it. This is HLD6. So when we're looking at this, it kind of begs the question, is this speciation through convergence coming in many different spaces? In the last week, there's been information coming out about the idea that Neanderthal and Denisovan are actually us, just some different genetics, like they're the earliest of us. And so as I look deeper into that, I'll give more information on it. Yet this would tell us, if this is really where we're coming from, that our earliest of our speciation is actually about 600,000 years ago in Britain, which would be weird because that is the oldest Neanderthal that we find. There's another one roughly at the same time, I think, in Northwest Europe as well. So when we are looking at speciation through convergence, it's important to understand that our species is coming together through speciation of convergence, because of the fact that is this coming together of convergence that gives us we like to think of ourselves as like the best and the brightest, right? We're the smartest species on the planet. We're damn sure of it. And we do the best we think we do, right? We're so big on this, right? The things that we have that give us the ability to do that comes from the fact that many became one, right? As we've talked about this entire portion of this slide, or the entire beginning portion of this slide, as many become one, as many become this, right? Every single one is made of many. We see that more power, not power, more, because power has so many bad, connotations to it. More capability we have. As many becomes one, more capable we are. And when we see that our species starts through many different species coming together, and little pockets of Homo sapien ancient ancestors are forming in several different spaces. And we're going to keep this within Africa currently, just because I need to dig down further before I look in those other things as being Homo sapien. So in these several different spaces of Africa, we see that many different Homo sapiens are a part of these groups. I want to give a little bit of vocabulary here. We think of the word tribe as indicating primitive, but the word tribe means a community based on genetic lineage. That is all the word tribe means, a community based on genetic lineage. And because all the word tribe means is a community based on genetic lineage, when we think of tribal as being primitive, we have to understand that that's not true. Bands are communities that are based on communal need. There's no genetic lineage that creates your citizenship. So you can think of being a Judaic human being as a tribe. It is a community based on genetic lineage. You must be born into the Judaic community to be a Judaic human being, right? Think of the United States as a band. The United States does not need genetic lineage for citizenship. You can come to this country and you can apply for citizenship and you can be a citizen in this country. That's not going to equal you being treated great. And Lord knows the United States has a lot of problems, and I'm not talking them up. All I'm saying is that a community based on being there, the need of you, right? That is a band. A community based on genetic lineage is a tribe. So we look at these spaces or communities in which the first Homo sapiens are born as communities that are bands, because of the fact that you are going to see several different subspecies or species, depending on which side of anthropology you want to take, within these different groups. And it is a try to say two of them at the same time, a Homo antecessor and a Homo ergaster coming together and creating Homo sapien 1, and a Homo erectus and a Homo heidelbergensis coming together and creating Homo sapien 2, and a Homo heidelbergensis and a Homo antecessor coming together and creating Homo sapien 3, and now you have three Homo sapiens within this band. And you see that this is happening in three different spaces, at least to start with. We believe currently that Homo sapien becomes a species between 100 and a singular unified species, as in the genetics for Homo sapien are distinct genomes, right? About 135 to 125,000 years ago. By this time, we have long known that we are already interacting with Homo neanderthal in the Levant and in the Arabian Peninsula. As I mentioned earlier, around the Mediterranean is a space that we have lived and been in for time immemorial, right? And really along the Nile River is one of those spaces. It was long considered the breadbasket, and yet not only is it considered the breadbasket by the ancients that wrote things down, we can also see paleoanthropologically that its inhabitation by species that are related to us goes back to at least Paranthropus boisei and Homo habilis, right? Because we find both Paranthropus boisei and Homo habilis. The earliest stone tool usage we find along the Nile River. So, are in regions associated with the Nile River, to my correct. Okay. From the earliest species that we find stone tool usage with, we find them along the Nile River would be the more correct way to state that, because I'm not exactly sure where our very first stone tool is found at this particular point in time. But from our earliest usage, we find these tools along the Nile River. And we can see that from our earliest interaction with the environment in that scientific manner, that there is this interaction along the Nile River. Now, the Nile River is one of those places that is a consistently refertilized space because it has the flooding of the Nile every year, at least until it was dammed. That consistent refertilization means that plants are able to grow there. The fertility of the area is extremely high, meaning that our ancient ancestors were going to be able to find plentiful food along this space. And it's also been a space of temperate weather for an extended period of time. So we can see us going back that far along that area. We see that Neanderthals never make it quite into Africa, to our knowledge, yet we do see that they make it to the northwest tip of Africa at this time. Now, why do I say the northwest tip of Africa at this time? Because at this point of time, Africa is not necessarily separated from the Arabian Peninsula in the manner that it is now. When sea levels are lower, the Red Sea is not there. And when the Red Sea is not there, Africa and the Arabian Peninsula become connected. So when Homo neanderthalis is living in the Levant area and living on the Arabian Peninsula, we see that they are part of mainland Africa at that point of time. Though, and we do see that the genetics for Homo neanderthalis goes across the entirety of Africa, with the exception of the Yoruba people and the Kwe people. Other than the Yoruba and the Kwe, which have three what we call ghost species, which we'll talk about in another broadcast. In them, other than the Yoruba and the Kwe, we see that Neanderthal is in everybody within Africa and everybody outside of Africa. And this is prior to colonization or the colonization of Africa. So when we can see that, we can see that the genetics were moving freely through. We have long believed that the genetics were moving freely through, not because Neanderthal made it to Africa outside the Levant and the Arabian Peninsula being connected to Africa at the time, but the genetics of Neanderthal that were coming from the intermixing between Homo sapien and Neanderthal were carried back by the Homo sapiens, who would go back into Africa and visit their homes. So this kind of tells us how we get to the point that our species is here, that we're not evolving from apes, that we're actually evolving from something that looks quite human, and that the evolutionary period is long and is continuous, right? And that us and Homo erectus, our ancestor species, are two species that have come together through a theoretical method of speciation prior and is now a factual method of speciation, which is speciation through convergence. We're going to talk in further lives and further um, uh, broadcasts about how othering has affected us throughout society and how othering is only about 10,000 years old. The idea that something that looks different than you or from somewhere else than you must be bad, right? That we translate into many different things these days. We didn't have that when we start, though. We don't have this when we start because we come from a space where nobody looks the same. Everybody looks different. The morphological differences between Heidelbergensis and Ancestor and Ergaster are how we rate these different species. The morphological differences are that broad that we create them as different species. So when we're looking at our parents, we're seeing our parents look like two different species, and that our grandparents likely look like a third species. And so when we see this intermixing, right, and this understanding of our band and our community being based on who best suits our community, and everybody's looking different and everybody's in these different stages of evolution, right? um, and by that I mean, maybe a Heidelbergensis and an ancestor get together and it's not quite a Homo sapien that they have, but that child becomes the parent of the further Homo sapien, right? So when we're looking at this, we see that we are born into communities that are vastly different, that have many differences within them. And so the idea that we would other, the idea that we would see differences as a negative is illogical, right? So when we are looking at why we are here, again, we see that many will tell you that the reason we're here is because God created this for us, and this is a gift. Um, we will talk about that further in the future. Um, I think it's important, though, to look at things from a logical and scientific space instead of from a blind faith space. For me, I must see the logic behind something. I must have something that shows me some um, validity to it, has some hard evidence of some form. And when I look at our interaction and our necessary interaction as a part of the biome, I can see a logical reason for us being speciated. Every species on this planet, from the tree to the dog, well, not the dog because the dog was created by us, but from the tree to the ancient buffalo, or to the woolly mammoth, or to the wild animals that we have today, to the different grasses that we have today, to us, every single one of those things is adapted to space through time. It takes roughly 100 generations for an adaptation to be actualized. So adapting to your space through time, generations, creates new, not always new species, but new livability, new survivability, right? And it is that adaptation to space through time that is giving all of the species on this planet a niche for which they fit, a thing that they do, a purpose that is theirs within the biome, whether it's providing oxygen or eating algae, or providing food for others, right? Every species on this planet fulfills a niche, fulfills a need of the broader community of the planet, of the broader space within the community of the planet. And we see that many species are given a role of tending, and that we're given a role of tending that's a little bit more advanced than many other species. What do I mean by this? Most animals are going to take from the plants the their eating of the plants actually helps the plants grow, right? That interaction, whether it's I eat the plant and then I excrete the seeds, or whether it's I only eat the older things because that's how my body is set to do, right? Through different methods of our body's interaction with the biome, our interaction with our daily necessities and our daily needs, we see that every animal and every plant, or not every animal and every plant, but many animals and many plants will tend each other, right? So we're not the only tenders. We are, though, the tenders that have been given a broader understanding of what it is to tend, how to tend, and this quest of creative knowledge that we talked about at the very beginning of this, that gives us better ways to tend. We don't, we're not really that different from anything around you. Like, we share like 98% of our genome with a banana. We, we are so much alike with everything else on this planet on so many levels that many times we have a hard time defining what separates us. I would state that what separates us truly is that we adapt our adaptations. Many other species on this planet adapt the environment to suit them. And it is in this adaptation of the environment to suit them that they actually provide some of that tending, right? So we see the beaver's dam as an adaptation that the beaver made to the environment to suit the beaver, that provides the right house for them, that provides a refrigerator for them, right? And still, that adaptation of the dam, damming the river creates pools that different fish can live within, right? Creates algae for different plant life or water life to actually get nutrient from, right? It creates an entire biome by building that dam, and it furthers the biome around it. So he, as the beaver, is able to adapt his surroundings. Everything is able to adapt their surroundings. That adaptation of the adaptation is what we do differently. We took that dam and we turned it into something else, right? We took that dam and we dammed the rivers and got electricity. So we have adapted our adaptations since the very first use of tools. It is Paranthropus boisei and Homo habilis that are using the first stone tools, yet it is the very first adaptation of that adaptation that we see in Homo erectus. This is this first spark of the scientific theory thought process working forward. We see that many other animals can create tools, but many other animals can't take that tool and then further adapt that tool to fit another need, to think of another space that that tool needs to fulfill. So for me, it is my belief and my understanding through everything that I have studied that the question I've been asking myself since I was asking, why do we call the sky blue? No, I mean, why do we use the word blue? The question I've been asking my whole life, the answer is because we are the tenders. We are those who are able to take care of every element of the biome on a broader scale if we would just remember and if we would just move back to that. I'm going to cut this short at an hour, and I want to go ahead and say at the end of this what I say at the end of all of my lives in TikTok, and what we'll be saying at the end of all of these podcasts. This is something that's extremely important to me. As we talk over these podcasts, I'll explain to you why we are nurturing and communal as a species and how we can biologically identify that. And I can explain to you why othering is wrong, why race theory was debunked, and we'll talk about all of those things. I want you to take me at my word today, though, because I don't want to go into the huge explanation that we are nurturing and communal as a species. And because we are nurturing and communal as a species, we need nurture and community to be healthy mentally and to be healthy physically. And we currently live in a society that teaches us that to be nurturing and communal is somehow a bad thing. How dare we? We shouldn't have done it that way. We should be doing something else. Why would you feed the homeless? Let's put out spikes. Why would you save a child when you could just force somebody to give birth? We live in a society that teaches us to be nurturing and communal, to think for community instead of think for self is a bad thing. And because we live in a society that teaches that nurture and community is a bad thing, many of us are dealing with a lot of depression and a lot of anxiety. We're also dealing with this feeling that we don't fit, that this is not right, that there's something wrong. And we often lead that to we're the problem. And I want you to know today that that is a healthy response to an unhealthy society. We live in an unhealthy society, and a healthy response is to feel like it's bad. It is healthy to feel like it's not okay when somebody's hitting you. It is healthy to feel like it's not okay when it's really not fucking okay. And because we live in a space and in a time and in a society that teaches us that the things that are innate needs for us as human beings are in fact bad, many of us don't receive them. Many of us do our best to give, and we receive very little in return. Now, many of us are taught to give grace to everybody else, to understand why that person hit you, and yet not taught to give grace to ourselves. We're not taught to think of our actions as a positive. We're not taught to remember that we did this in a positive way. If it fucked up, I'm sorry, it wasn't my, like I'll do better next time, right? Many of us are taught that we should give grace to everybody else. We never have grace to give to ourselves. And I want to ask you today to give yourself grace today. That doesn't mean stop giving it to anybody else. It just means give yourself grace today. Remember that you're doing your best to act within love. And if you're doing it wrong, it's okay. We all make mistakes. Remember that you live in a society that's unhealthy. And so your feelings that it's not okay are healthy feelings. Your feelings that something's wrong is true. Just remember that you're not the problem, that it is society itself that is the problem. You are not the issue. It is society itself that is the issue. We're all worthy of love just by breathing, every single one of us. You do not have to be exploitable. You do not have to be somebody that can be taken advantage of. You don't have to make $1 for somebody that's exploiting you, right? You don't have to give everything you have and get nothing in return to be worthy. You are worthy just by breathing. You are worthy just by existing. You are worthy of love and compassion and grace just by existing. So please give yourself that love and compassion and grace today. Please remember that you are worthy. And please remember that it is those who are awake, who can see that there is something wrong, who can affect change. So you are not only worthy, but you are necessary. You are not only worthy, you are necessary for affecting change and making a better world for everybody else around you and for yourself as well. Please remember that you are not a part of the problem, you are a part of the solution. To give yourself grace and compassion, and that it is society that is ill and not yourself today. I'm going to try and be doing these at least once a week. Can't actually promise when and where right now. I'm going to try to, though. If you're new to my space, you do not know that as a war vet, I have a lot of mental health issues myself, and I cannot be obligated to others anymore, because if I am obligated to others, I stop liking what I do. And so I'm trying not to put obligations on this either, but I will make sure that I'm getting out at least one podcast a week, and that I'm on YouTube at least once a week. You will be able to find me on Spotify, and I'm working on several other platforms. I'll make sure everybody knows. I'll make sure and put them on the YouTube channel as well so people can find them. Take care, everybody. Remember, the website is widdaord.com so that you can get there and find some sources for this. Have a great day.